My name is Aris, and this is the story of how one Santorini night turned my heart into a canvas painted with love. It was August 2025, and I was 35, a chef running a small restaurant on Santorini's cliffs, where sunsets weave gold into the sea and nights whisper promises. For years, I'd poured my soul into dishes: grilled octopus kissed with thyme, lamb slow-cooked with rosemary, each plate a piece of me, crafted to warm strangers' hearts. But when the last guest left and the kitchen fell silent, I was alone, my craft a shield against an ache I couldn't name. My food could spark joy in others, but it couldn't fill my soul's quiet corners, until that summer, when a stranger's words lit a flame I hadn't known I needed. That night, my restaurant was alive, its terrace spilling with guests, laughter mingling with olive oil and sea salt. I was in the kitchen, plating honey-drenched baklava, my hands steady but my heart restless. I'd come out as gay at 27, left Athens to chase this dream, and built a life here, but love had been a fleeting visitor, slipping through my fingers like sand. I'd stopped looking, convinced my kitchen was enough. Then I saw him. He sat at a corner table, alone, a notebook open, his pen moving as if capturing the world in ink. He was perhaps 36, with short silver-flecked hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that held a quiet intensity, like they'd seen 1,000 stories. He was dressed simply, a linen shirt rolled at the sleeves, but there was a magnetic pull about him. I watched as he tasted my dull maids, his eyes closing briefly, a smile spreading, a smile like dawn breaking over the caldera. My pulse quickened, not from the kitchen's rush but from something deeper, new. I stepped out to clear a table nearby, and his gaze met mine, steady and warm. "This," he said, gesturing to his plate, "is poetry." His voice was low, rich, with an accent hinting at distant cities, maybe Paris, maybe Istanbul. I laughed, caught off guard, my cheeks warming. "I'm just a cook," I said, but he shook his head, his eyes never leaving mine. "No," he said, "you're an artist." The word hit me like a wave, stirring something buried long ago. I offered him a glass of ouzo, my hand steadier than my heart. "I'm Leon," he said, taking the glass, his fingers brushing mine for a moment that felt like forever. "I'm Aris," I replied, my voice softer than I meant. He wasn't just a guest. He saw me, not just my food, but me. The restaurant hummed around us, but in that moment, it was just us, the sea sparkling below, the air thick with possibility. I didn't know who Leon was, not yet, but I knew one thing: this wasn't just a night. This was a spark, bright and alive, and I wasn't going to let it fade. My name is Aris, and this is where our story begins. The restaurant pulsed with life, glasses clinking, voices weaving through the warm August air, but Leon's presence carved a quiet space just for us. He lingered at his corner table, the ouzo I'd offered glinting in his hand, his notebook now closed, his attention fully on me. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with curiosity, and asked about my dishes, why I paired rosemary with lamb, what made Santorini's tomatoes burst with flavor. His questions weren't polite small talk, they were hungry, as if he wanted to taste every layer of my story, to understand the heart behind my craft. I found myself answering with an openness I hadn't felt in years, my usual reserve melting under his gaze. I told him about my grandmother's recipes, how her hands taught me to knead dough, how I'd left a soul-crushing desk job in Athens to chase this dream on the island. "Cooking," I said, my voice low, "is how I speak when words fail me." He nodded, his smile soft but sure, like he heard the unspoken parts too. "I hear you," he said, and in that moment, I believed he did. He shared his own story, his voice steady but threaded with a wanderer's longing, each word painting a life lived in motion. Leon was a writer, chasing inspiration across continents, Lisbon's cobbled alleys, Cairo's chaotic markets, New York's neon-drenched nights. "I write to feel alive," he said, his fingers tracing the edge of his glass, "but I've never found a place to stay still, to belong." His words struck a chord, echoing the quiet ache I'd carried for years, the loneliness that lingered when the kitchen lights dimmed. I poured him another ouzo, our fingers brushing again, the touch sending a spark through me. Then I offered a dessert, baklava dripping with honey and walnuts, and watched as he savored it, his eyes closing in delight, a low hum escaping his lips. "This," he said, opening his eyes to meet mine, "is what home tastes like." My heart stirred, and I smiled, caught off guard by how much his words meant, how they filled a space I'd long left empty. "You should see Santorini through my eyes," he said, his tone light but his gaze serious, like an invitation to something deeper. The kitchen was still a whirlwind, orders piling up, plates clattering, but his warmth was a tide pulling me in. I hesitated, my chef's instinct tugging me back to the stove, but something stronger won. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I asked my sous chef to take over, ignoring his raised eyebrow, and stepped out from behind the counter. We moved to the terrace, the caldera stretching endless below, the whitewashed houses glowing under a sky dusted with stars. Leon stood close, his shoulder grazing mine, and began describing the island like a poem, the cliffs as ancient storytellers, the sea as a restless muse, the moonlight as a lover's promise. His words wove a spell, and I listened, captivated, as he turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "You belong here, Aris," he said, his voice soft but certain, "in this light, in this place." My breath caught, my heart racing not from nerves but from clarity. This wasn't just a conversation, not just a fleeting moment. This was us, weaving something fragile, something real, under Santorini's timeless sky. We left the restaurant behind, stepping into Santorini's cobblestone streets, where the moon cast a silver glow over the caldera, turning the world into a dream. Leon walked beside me, his shoulder brushing mine, each touch a quiet spark that warmed the August night. The air was heavy with jasmine and sea salt, and I felt a pull, like the tide drawing me closer to him. He asked why I'd chosen this life, what cooking meant to me, his voice gentle but probing, as if he wanted to know every corner of my soul. I opened up, more than I had in years, my words spilling out like wine from an uncorked bottle. I told him about coming out at 27, the weight of my family's silence, how I'd found my voice in Santorini's kitchens, where every dish was a declaration, "I am enough." "My food," I said, my voice raw, "is my way of proving I'm still here." He listened, his gaze steady, his presence a warm hearth in the cool night. Then he shared his own story, his words measured but heavy with truth. He'd left a small town that tried to box him in, turned to writing to heal the wounds, to make sense of a world that hadn't always welcomed him. "I've been running," he said, his voice softening, "chasing muses in every city, but never staying long enough to belong." He paused, looking out at the sea, then back at me. "Tonight, with you, I want to stop running." My chest tightened, not with fear but with a hope I hadn't dared to feel. We stopped by a low stone wall, the sea glittering below, the moon hanging bright above. "Aris," he said, his hand grazing mine, his touch electric, "this feels like a story I've been waiting to write." My heart pounded, and I took his hand, our fingers interlocking, solid and sure, like they'd always belonged together. The streets fell silent, just us and the hum of the waves. This wasn't just a walk. This was the beginning of something I'd never dared to dream, a spark catching fire under Santorini's moon. We sat on a weathered stone bench, the moon bright above, Santorini's cliffs glowing like a painting come to life. Leon's hand stayed in mine, warm and steady, and I felt years of loneliness dissolve, like salt in the sea. He talked about his novels, stories of love carved from loss, of places he'd left behind, each one a piece of his heart. "I write to remember," he said, his voice low, "but tonight, with you, I want to live, to stay." I nodded, my walls crumbling under the weight of his honesty. "I know that feeling," I said, my voice thick. "My kitchen keeps me grounded, feeds my soul, but when the lights go out, it's just me and the silence." His eyes softened, and he squeezed my hand, his touch a silent vow. A soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine, and Leon stood, pulling me to my feet. "Dance with me," he said, his voice a mix of challenge and promise, though there was no music, only the rhythm of the waves and our breaths. We moved together, slow and close, my hands resting on his shoulders, his arms encircling my waist. The world faded, Santorini's cliffs, my restaurant, the doubts I'd carried for years. It was just us, swaying under the moon, our bodies finding a rhythm as old as the sea. Aris, he whispered, his lips brushing my ear, I want this, us, everything. My breath hitched, and I looked into his eyes, seeing trust, desire, a man ready to leap. I leaned in, our lips meeting in a kiss that felt like home, warm, deep, a spark igniting into a flame that could light the darkest nights. The kiss deepened, slow and certain, the moon watching like a silent ally, its light wrapping us in silver. When we pulled back, Leon's smile glowed brighter than the stars, his eyes shining with a certainty that mirrored my own. We sat again on the bench, talking as the night stretched on, sharing dreams we'd kept locked away. He wanted to write a novel here, rooted in Santorini's light, a story that didn't end with goodbye. I wanted my food to tell new tales, to feed not just bodies but a life shared with someone. What if we build that? I said, my voice steady, sure. You, me, this island, a home. Leon nodded, his hand tight in mine, his smile unwavering. I'm all in, he said, and I believed him, every word a brick in the foundation we were laying. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper, my grandmother's handwritten recipe for grilled octopus, the dish that started my journey, the one I'd perfected with my own hands. This, I said, pressing it into his palm, is you and me, tonight, the start of our story. He held it like a relic, his eyes glistening, then leaned in and kissed me again, soft and tender, a promise sealed under the Santorini sky. As dawn brushed the cliffs with pink and gold, we walked hand in hand through the quiet streets, planning a life, his words filling pages, my flavors filling plates, a home by the sea where love would always have a seat at the table. My name is Aris, and this is our story, a gay love story that proves one night can light a lifetime. If this story warmed your heart, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more. Comment below, would you chase a spark in one night? Help us hit 1,000 subscribers, your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, find your light.